Good afternoon, criminophiles, to another episode of Homicide Cases. I'm your host, Misfit.
I'm Patrick Andrews, an American serial killer with 3 known victims.
Chapter 1, Introduction and Forensic Profile.
1A, Definitional Parameters. Patrick Andrews as a documented serial killer. Patrick Franklin Andrews, born circa 1980 and formerly a resident of Washington, D.C., is an American criminal formerly classified as a serial killer. This classification is based on a documented pattern of his lethal offenses, which span a decade, resulting in the homicide of 3 distinct individuals between 1997 and 2007. The chronological distribution of these 3 homicides across different jurisdictions and environments, specifically street killings in Washington, D.C., followed by an institutional murder within a federal penitentiary system, is central to understanding his criminal profile and subsequent legal response. Andrews' extensive criminal status includes multiple convictions stemming from both the District of Columbia and of federal courts. In the D.C. system, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree homicide while armed, along with corresponding charges for possession of a firearm during a crime of violence and numerous weapon offenses. Following his 3rd homicide while incarcerated, Andrews was convicted federally for homicide by a federal prison serving a life sentence. These convictions resulted in layered sentences, 35 years to life from the District of Columbia and a subsequent mandatory life imprisonment sentence handed down by the federal court. Andrews is presently incarcerated. The progression of Andrews' violent behavior, moving from high-risk public street crimes to a targeted, coordinated institutional homicide, highlights a dangerous capacity for adaptation within highly restrictive environments. While traditional serial killer typology often emphasizes geographical patterns or consistent victimology, Andrews' shift confirms the sustained lethality of the offender. His actions demonstrate that his propensity for initiating and escalating conflicts in the fatal encounters remained intact, and indeed become more calculated, even while under the maximum control of the Bureau of Prison System. This persistent and unmitigated threat level underscores the decision by federal prosecutors to pursue capital punishment for the 3rd homicide.
Chapter 2, The Early Homicides. Washington, D.C., 1997-2000.
2A, Homicide 1, the shooting of Robert Ward, August 4, 1997. Andrews' first documented homicide occurred on August 4, 1997 in Washington, D.C., when he fatally shot 18-year-old Robert Ward. The recorded motive for this act was rooted in interpersonal conflict, summarized simply as Andrews having a beef with a young victim. This description suggests an impulsive yet targeted act characteristic of street violence, where firearms are deployed swiftly to resolve personal antagonisms. 2B, Homicide Number 2, the killing of Dion Rivers, July 2, 2000. Less than 3 years later, on July 2, 2000, Andrews committed his 2nd homicide, this time acting in collaboration with another individual, Randall C. Mack, in Washington, D.C. The victim was Dion Rivers. The underlying motive for Rivers' killing was explicitly retaliatory, stemming from an altercation that had occurred the day before. Rivers had reportedly shot firecrackers one of which nearly struck David Brady's girlfriend. Brady was a friend of Andrews and Mack. Brady's anger over this perceived slight led to Andrews and Mack intervening with lethal force. The disappropriate nature of the response, using deadly force to settle a dispute that began over firecrackers, reveals a core behavior pattern. Andrews utilized extreme violence as the default mechanism for resolving perceived slights or showing allegiance to his social network. The high potential for escalation and embedded disregard for human life became a defining characteristic of his criminal trajectory. The joint trial for the homicide of Dion Rivers concluded on May 15, 2002. Both Andrews and Mack were found guilty of first-degree homicide while armed, and 2 counts each of 3 separate weapons offenses: carrying a pistol without a license, possession of an unregistered firearm, and possession of ammunition for an unregistered firearm. The convictions were upheld on appeal. Andrews specifically challenged the denial of his motion to suppress a loaded pistol recovered from an automobile allegedly owned by him, and he asserted that his convictions for the weapons offenses violated his individual right to bear arms under the Second Amendment. The appellate court rejected these contentions, affirming all of Andrews' convictions. The appellate litigation, which centered heavily on firearm possession, confirms that the initial police investigation successfully secured crucial weapon evidence directly linking Andrews to the commission of those violent crimes.
The Court of Appeals denied my petition and upheld my 35 to life sentence.
Following his convictions in the District of Columbia, Patrick Andrews was ultimately sentenced to a total of 35 years to life in prison for the 2 D.C. homicides. This indeterminate sentence was a crucial turning point, as it established the necessary legal predicate for his subsequent escalation into a federal capital case. At the time of the 2007 homicide, Andrews was serving his 35 years to life sentence, placing him firmly under the status of a federal prisoner serving a life sentence. This condition was later cited by the federal government as the primary statutory aggravating factor justifying the ultimate pursuit of the death penalty for his 3rd homicide. The fact that the first sentence, designed to ensure incapacitation, did not prevent him from committing a further lethal felony demonstrates a profound failure of the correctional system to contain his inherent violent capabilities.
Chapter 3, The Institutional Homicide, USP Hazleton.
3A. Recidivism within a federal penal system. By October 2007, Patrick Andrews, then approximately 27 years old, was incarcerated and serving his D.C. sentence of 35 years to life in the U.S. Penitentiary Hazleton in Hazleton, West Virginia. The institutional environment provided a new stage for his continuing pattern of lethal violence. His co-conspirator in the 3rd homicide was Kevin Bellinger, another inmate who himself was serving a significant sentence, 15 years to life, for an assault with intent to kill dating back to 2000. The collaboration between 2 inmates already serving lengthy, indeterminate sentences for severe violence underscores the enhanced nature of the threat they pose within the correctional facility. 3B. Homicide number 3. The orchestrated homicide of Jesse Harris, October 7th, 2007. On October 7th, 2007, Andrews executed his 3rd homicide, killing fellow inmate Jesse Harris, age 28, at USP Hazleton. This attack was meticulous, described by authorities as an orchestrated attack using homemade knives commonly referred to as shanks. The premeditation required for acquiring and concealing contraband weapons and coordinating the timing of the ambush demonstrates a qualitative escalation in Andrews' criminal methodology compared to his earlier street crimes. The attack occurred around 6:30 p.m. while a group of inmates was being moved from the recreation yard back to their cells. Andrews and Bellinger confronted Harris, who was unarmed, and attempted to retreat from the aggressors. Harris was stabbed repeatedly, sustaining approximately 20 stab wounds from Andrews' shank. The entire lethal assault was completed rapidly, taking less than a minute before a correctional officer approached the scene and the attackers fled. Harris ultimately died from the multiple injuries sustained during the swift, brutal attack. The nature of this act, an organized ambush with clandestine weapons, executed with maximum speed and lethality, demonstrates the institutionalization of violence. Andrews had adapted his violent behaviors to the realities of maximum security confinement, using prison routines and resources, for example, the movement of inmates, the manufacture of weapons, to maximize its lethal effect on a targeted individual. Chapter 3C: Apprehension, Investigation, and Evidence. The investigation into the homicide of Jesse Harris was jointly handled by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the United States Bureau of Prisons. The swift apprehension of Andrews was largely due to the penitentiary security infrastructure. Officers were able to identify the attackers quickly after reviewing the surveillance footage. The surveillance footage constituted the central and irrefutable piece of evidence. It captured Andrews and Bellinger engaging in a verbal confrontation with Harris, followed immediately by the two attackers wielding their weapons and assaulting the unarmed victim. This objective visual evidence was critical to the federal prosecution, minimizing dependence on potentially compromised inmate testimony, often required in institutional violence cases. The reliability of this evidence effectively secured the government's ability to proceed with capital charges.
Chapter 4: The Federal Capital Case and Final Sentencing.
Chapter 4A: Statutory Basis for Capital Prosecution. For the 2007 homicide of Jesse Harris, Patrick Andrews was charged federally with one count of homicide by federal prisoner serving a life sentence and one count of second-degree homicide in a federal facility. Crucially, the federal government determined that the circumstances warranted seeking the death penalty under Chapter 228 of Title 18 of the United States Code. In October 2012, approximately 5 years after the offense, the government filed and served a notice of intent to seek the death penalty against Andrews. The decision to seek capital punishment rested heavily on statutory aggravating factors defined in 18 United States Code 3592. The government specifically contended that Andrews' prior convictions, the two first-degree homicides committed in Washington, D.C. in 1997 and 2000, constituted proof of the necessary statutory aggravating circumstances to justify the death penalty, should he be convicted of the capital offense charged in Chapter 1. The fact that he was already serving a life sentence when he committed the third homicide placed him in the highest category of risk and recidivism under federal law. Chapter 4B: Pretrial Defense Challenges. Federal capital litigation involves intensive legal scrutiny, and the Andrews case proved no exception. The proceedings were complex, formally designated as such by U.S. District Judge Irene M. Keeley. One significant procedural challenge mounted by Andrews' defense team involved the timing of the incident. The defense sought to dismiss the indictment or strike the notice of intent based on the approximately 5 year delay between the date Harris was killed in 2007 and the dates the incident and NOI were filed in 2012. This pre indictment delay, while lengthy, is not uncommon in complex federal capital cases which require exhaustive preparation and coordination between the FBI, the BOP, and the Department of Justice prosecutors regarding the statutory criteria and aggravating factors. Andrews' counsel also argued that his period of solitary confinement following the homicide violated his Eighth Amendment rights. The court, however, rejected the motions to dismiss. The judicial determination was that even if the solitary confinement claim was valid, the appropriate remedy for constitutional violations in confinement is a civil action, not the dismissal of capital indictment. These pretrial maneuvers illustrate the defensive strategy aimed at disrupting the procedural momentum of the government's capital case. 4C. The plea agreement and life sentence. April 2015. In April 2015, Patrick Andrews, then 34 years old, pled guilty to the federal charges, including one count of homicide by a federal prisoner serving a life sentence and one count of second-degree homicide. This decision follows a strategic assessment of the government's formidable case. The prosecution has successfully secured a conviction against Andrews' co-defendant, Kevin Bellinger, who was found guilty by a federal jury in June 2014 and subsequently sentenced to life imprisonment. With the reliability of the surveillance footage confirmed by Bellinger's conviction and the strength of the statutory aggravating factors, the two prior homicides, Andrews faced a near certain conviction in a capital trial. The resulting plea agreement represented a successful mitigation of capital risk. By pleading guilty, Andrews accepted maximum incapacitation for the rest of his life, trading the certainty of incarceration for the removal of the ultimate penalty. U.S. District Judge Irene M. Keeley sentenced Andrews to life in prison on both counts. This mandatory life sentence, layered onto his existing D.C. sentence of 35 years to life, ensured his permanent removal from both the public domain and the general population of the federal prison system.
Chapter 5, Criminological and Legal Conclusions.
Chapter 5A, Serial Violence Typology, Conflict, Calculation, and Consistency. The criminal career of Patrick Andrews demonstrates a consistent commitment to lethal violence spanning a decade. His initial offenses in Washington, D.C., characterized by using firearms to settle perceived problems, revealed a low threshold for the use of extreme force in social conflicts. The shift to the penitentiary environment did not diminish his propensity. Instead, it refined his methodology. The 2007 homicide of Jesse Harris was not an opportunistic outburst, but an orchestrated attack using clandestinely acquired weapons. This progression from impulsive yet targeted street crime to calculated institutional violence is compelling evidence of a high-risk offender whose violent tendencies successfully adapted to and thrived within a maximum security setting. Chapter 5B, The Legal Weight of Recidivism and the Failure of Incapacitation. Andrews' case presents a rare and critical study in absolute recidivism, illustrating the inability of an initial indeterminate sentence, for example, 35 years to life, to achieve its core goal of incapacitation. His commission of a third homicide while already serving time for two prior homicides provided the federal government with powerful legal leverage. The federal statutory scheme is designed to address this specific type of high-level threat. The existence of prior homicide convictions when used as statutory aggravators in a capital case under United States Code 18, Chapter 3592, validated the federal government's pursuit of the death penalty. While the ultimate sentence was mandatory life imprisonment following a plea agreement, the procedural intensity, the designation of the case as complex, and a 5-year path to indictment underscores the acute nature of the threat Andrews represented to the institutional system. His layered sentences, 35 years to life for the D.C. homicides and the federal mandatory life sentence, ensures that he remains under maximum security control permanently. 5C, Final Confinement Status. The costs associated with managing, investigating, prosecuting, and permanently incarcerating institutional serial killers like Patrick Andrews are substantial. His status as a 3-time murderer necessitated not only a federal capital prosecution, but also mandates continuous maximum security confinement and specialized management protocols within the Bureau of Prisons. These resources are expanded to protect both correctional officers and the general inmate population from individuals who demonstrate zero capacity for nonviolence, regardless of the level of control imposed upon them. Andrews is currently incarcerated, reportedly serving his sentence at USP Beaumont. And that concludes another episode of Homicide Cases, as I close the file on Patrick Andrews. Join me next time as I open the file on Richard Angelo.
Well, that's my story of how I ended up at Beaumont Correctional Facility for life.
Thanks for watching. If this is your kind of content, then please give me a like and follow. It'll help me keep this series going. This is Misfit signing off, and as always, stay safe.